What's up, Calvary? My name is Mike Guaglione, and I'm joined by Laura Briggs, and this is Calvary Campus. If you're not familiar with how Calvary Campus works, we do that here basically when the kids go back to school in September. The adults go back to school too, and what that means is that 500 people descend on this campus and go into a bunch of breakout rooms, and that's where we take a deep dive into topics that you probably couldn't get to on a Sunday. And we decided, like, hey, we're all sitting in our houses, basically. Why don't we just do Calvary Campus now, because it really doesn't matter who has free time or not. And so we are bringing back a fan favorite from Calvary Campus, which is a book study through Mere Christianity. When I was first asked to do this, which is probably like, I don't know, 5 or 6 days ago. So if this isn't a great course, you'll know why. But I was sitting on one couch, my dad was sitting on another, and he was basically like, you know what, we should start Calvary Campus. Would you do your Mere Christianity course? And it struck me because I remembered the history of how the book, Mere Christianity, actually came to be. The book is actually, many people don't know this, the book is a series of broadcasts that C.S. Lewis did during the time that London was being bombed by the Nazis. The BBC came to him and said, hey, listen, we would like you to go on air and just talk about the basic fundamentals of Christianity or the faith. And they say at that time that C.S. Lewis's voice was about as recognized as Winston Churchill's. Kids knew him because he was popular for the Chronicles of Narnia. Adults knew him because he had written the Screw Tape Letters, and some of those books had made its way into like popular fiction. And so C.S. Lewis's voice became iconic. Years later, they packaged them into 4 different essays. Those 4 essays were then combined into this book, Mere Christianity. And so I just thought it was super interesting, the timing and the cultural moment that we're in, that we would study through this book specifically, in a time when we're all basically shelter in place. A book that was written when those Londoners were sheltered in place. Yeah. And we're probably exploring some of the same questions as us. Isn't it so interesting that the way the world works, we tend to ask the same questions over and over and over and over again. Yeah. Doesn't matter which 100-year period you're part of. So I think that that's super cool. We're really excited to bring this to you guys. I know that there's a couple hundred people in the live stream right now. We want to make sure that you shout this out, tell your friends to join. The cool thing is, when we're here in this space, we usually have to cap the classrooms to like 90 people, but now we don't really have a cap size. So if the whole world starts watching this, that's totally cool. While that is the case, we want to make this as much of a classroom environment as possible, so we just welcome you into the space. Make sure that you kind of leave comments in the chat. We'll always do a Q&A after this is done for any questions that pop up. We have a person whose literal job, if you could like turn the camera around, they're sitting there just typing questions as they come in. And during the Q&A, they're going to run a bunch of questions up to me and Laura, and then we'll go through those. So if you have questions during any part of this, we would love for you to drop them in the chat. Yeah. Other than that, what are we talking about? Well, first of all, I guess we should introduce who we are. Yeah. So I'm Mike Guaglione. You guys are probably familiar with me. I preach here every now and then. I'm also related to somebody who is a guy who helps out at the church named Bob Guaglione.
Good helper.
And I've taught this class a couple times for Calvary Campus. I don't have much of like an educational resume. I went to like a state school. Oh, shout out Rowan University. And I wouldn't call myself like an academic, not by a long shot, but I do read a ton. I read about 100 books a year, and I read 1,000 books from 2010 to 2020. And I just love books. I think books are amazing. In fact, we got quarantined. I came down here. I live in New York now. I came down to visit my baby sister. She was home from college. And we decided to go to, we decided to go out to eat for the night, and then I was going to catch a train home that night, just a quick up and back. And that Thursday night, the world basically ended. And I couldn't go back on Friday, couldn't go back on Saturday, and then I was like, I don't know if I want to go back on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So I was stuck living for basically 2 or 3 weeks straight with one outfit. And it was this pair of pants, and it was a sweatshirt, and the sweatshirt said, "Books are magic." And I was like, you know what, I'm going to take this as like a sign from God that I should teach this C.S. Lewis class, because I was quarantined for like 50 days straight with a Books are Magic sweatshirt. All my friends, like when I would get on FaceTime with them or whatever, they'd be like, that's it, that's Mike, that's his personal brand. So anyway, that's me. Here's what I can promise you. I work in advertising, and in advertising, the whole concept is you need to make complex ideas simple. And so what I can promise through the course of reading this book is for anybody who has had a problem understanding mere Christianity in the past, anybody who struggles to read some of these older books, I promise to take any complex ideas and make them as simple as possible for you. And I think that I can do that because my job is to make complex ideas simple and then sell them. I'm just going to leave out the selling part for what we're doing here. Laura, who are you?
I am Laura Briggs. A lot of you guys know me. I was a communications director here at Calvary for quite a few years. I do full-time wedding photography now, so I have no job right now. All weddings have stopped. But yeah, I am an avid reader as well. I'm not quite on Mike's level. I keep it to 50 books a year, like one a week, you know, just try to be humble about it. But Mike and I are actually in a book club together. And so you'll get to meet some of the faces of the book club over these next few weeks.
Yeah, the format that we decided to do this in is Laura is here, and basically that chair will be another person from our book club next week. And we'll just keep rotating different book club people out. And the reason is because, honestly, I just feel like people who love books should be talking about these things. And so it's really helpful to be on stage with somebody who is like, yeah, I love that words have the power to just create new ideas and new ways of living. And like, I'm 100% convinced that books really are magic. Like, most of the things that I believe in life, I always tell people, like, everybody that shaped who I am is basically dead. Because it's just a bunch of people who wrote books over the last 500 years, and I've lived my whole life according to the things that they've thought. So books are magic, and my prayer is that this book will be magic for you.
And can I say something just to like encourage people? Something that I love about our book club is it's cyber. Like, it's just a group text. There's a guy in our book club group text who I've never met. I've never met Josh. I've never met Josh. But like, we text all the time. So,
literally, he's like, Laura, how's your Easter?
Yeah, he's like, I know
that.
about everything you've done in the past week. But what's so cool about our book club is like, literally every aspect of life has changed with this virus. Like, everything stopped and became cyber, but not our book club. You know, like, it was just always cyber. So what I think is so cool about this class, studying a book together, is it's, you know, say there's 200 people on this live stream. It's like we're in this cyber book club. And gosh, I know, you know, me personally, and I'm sure so many of you are just craving like connectivity and community during this time. So I love it. Let's just treat it as a big book club.
I love that.
Yeah.
World's biggest book club. Here we go. Here's a question that I think that we should answer before we go any further. And the question is this: why are you here? I know for me, I am probably here because in 2015, I was in Nairobi, and I lived there for a couple months, and I was doing a weird thing where I was helping out a church, and so in the morning I would work for this church. The hours are kind of staggered, and so I would work for the church in the morning, and then at night I would work for my clients back here in the States without telling them. So I'd be on these conference calls and all that, and the thing is, a lot of people worked at night. A lot of the expats, we would go to a coffee house, and we'd all work from there. So picture this coffee house with a lot of journalists and all that. So I became friends with a couple of them. One of the journalists said, hey, can I take you out to dinner? And we went out to dinner, and I sit down with her. She's a girl who writes for the Washington Post. And she goes, I have a question. She was like, she knew what I did and why I was there. And she said, you seem like a really smart guy. You have a good job. You know, you've made your way around the world. You understand like how the world works. I can't wrap my head around how someone like you could really believe that all of this started with a talking snake. And I was like, I thought this was a date. And she just grilled me about all kinds of like things about Christianity. And it was funny because I walked away from that conversation and I was like, do I believe that it all started with a talking snake? Like, it does seem kind of ridiculous when you're asked the question that way. And I guess like I did, and I was kind of like, but why? And I started to delve into some of that stuff like a little bit more.
Yeah.
To try and, like, I had a lot of general thoughts about that, but I had nothing like hyper specific. And then I got even more curious because I went to a summer program like 2 or 3 years later in Cambridge. And there was one of the grad students there who was studying Teresa of Avila, who's a mystic nun. And she was talking about Teresa of Avila, and I was like, I know who that is. Like, you know, I'm actually from a Christian background, so like, I know that Teresa of Avila was like this crazy nun who did these crazy things. And I said, why are you so interested in her? And she was like, I'm just interested that someone would like devote their whole life to a book full of fairy tales. And I want to study it.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. That wasn't what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And so it was funny because I was like, it was there. It was a weird irony because 2 months earlier, I had read a book by F.F. Bruce, who's a Christian theologian, and he had written a book called The Canon of Scripture, and basically just did the most historical, exhaustive thing you can do on why the Bible is one of the most reliable documents that's ever been created in the history of the world. And he was a chair at Cambridge, and here we are sitting on a bridge talking about how this book is full of fairy tales, and I'm like, 7 years ago, a guy here wrote a book that would blow your book away, so how could we think these two different things? And basically what it comes down to is, the world's almost presented us with like two options. You're either a Christian and you're dumb, or you're secular and you're smart. And I just think that's like fundamentally untrue. So I'm here because I am passionate about walking through how intelligent the Christian faith is. Knowing that it's more than that, but just how intelligent the Christian faith is. So why are you here?
Well, I'm here because you asked me to be here. No, but I know what you mean. I'm here. I have read this book probably 4 times, and I kind of sped read it yesterday, like my 5th time. I think that the reason I'm so drawn to it, personally, just from life experience for me, kindergarten to 12th grade was in a Christian school, and am so grateful for that, and absolutely loved my education. But when it came to like my junior, my senior year of like, okay, what's next for me? It was very, very clear to me that I had been existing in this bubble. And I knew that I wanted to go to a non-Christian school. And I just had this like thing in my brain of like, oh my gosh, I just feel like I'm in apologetics class, and I'm in, Life with Christ and Acts. And like, that's what my day looks like. Like, I'm like inundated with Scripture and truth and all of those things that are good, but it got to the point that it was almost like a little bit stifling, and I was like, man, I need like perspective, and I want to own what I believe for myself, and I want to be able to like articulate it, and even articulate like, hey, here's what I've been through and how God showed up and what that looked like, because up till then, I mean, you knew me my whole childhood. I was just like this. Yeah,
everything's perfect.
Everything's perfect. I'm just like a floating flower or whatever. But like, it was interesting because that was like me at 18. And then, like, thank the Lord, I never lost my faith. But like, even in this past year, it's almost like God did something in me. Something happened in the past year that just completely flipped life on its head for me. And all of my plans just got taken away from me. Rug was pulled out from under me. And I know so many people have stories like this where it's like, wow, this is an experience that actually changes everything for me. Yeah. And it's almost like I found myself in this place of, kind of the opposite of when I was 18, when I was like, I'm inundated with truth, but I know God is real because of what I feel in my heart. It was almost like, man, I do not feel like God is near at all in my heart, but I'm holding on to these truths that I have. Yeah. So that's what's so cool about a book like this. And a book, I'm not saying this is the Bible. The Bible is God's word. It's the truth. But like a book like this is like, man, like these different places I've been in life, it is wonderful to read this book again. So that's why, like, I'm so excited for all the people tuning in. You could be in so many different places. You couldn't believe, anything in this book. And that's okay, because the way that Lewis delivers it can really reach and touch anybody.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for me is that there are times like if you live as a Christian long enough, you're going to have these moments where it's like it feels like heaven is silent.
Yeah.
And you have moments where you kind of hit your rock bottoms and you're basically like, where is God in this stuff? Yeah. And the interesting thing is, I feel like theology doesn't matter like a lot of the time in just daily life. It's like the intellectual or whatever. It's like, you know what, like the experience with the living God is basically what this is about. But the weird thing is when you're not feeling the experience with the living God, at least for me, I would be like, see, it's not true. And so I would try and run the other direction. But I would go back to a book like this and I would be like, But the logic is
yeah.
so true.
Yeah.
Like, even if I don't even hear anything, it just seems like I can't
Right.
believe anything else because it's so airtight.
Right.
And so that always ended up drawing me back. So it's this weird interplay as we live our life between like the intellectual and the
Yes.
experiential.
Yeah.
You know? And I've like, so like we've both lived through this like last 10-year phase where everybody's really like hot on the idea of deconstruction.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, when all these like pastors were losing their faith and like a lot of my friends and stuff, I was like, man, I should be the poster boy of deconstruction. I was like a pastor's kid. I grew up, that's supposed to be like this like crazy environment that like pastor's kids have this stereotype of being bad. And I was like, you know, I was exposed to a lot of things and like I like live in New York City and it was just like, man, I should have like been like the guy out the back door instantly from deconstruction, but I never was, and I never even was like close,
Yeah.
you know? And I think it's funny because I think the reason why is because I've had a gradual deconstruction in safe environments
Yeah.
instead of some crazy thing that upends my whole life and
Yeah.
then run another direction. I know
Yeah, I
people
feel
who
that way
like,
too.
they hit a brick wall and they like read Sapiens and now they're the expert on
Right.
like how the world works
Right.
and it just changed everything. And I'm like, graciously, through my parents and some of the people that I know, I was given books like that when I was 10.
Right.
And I was exploring this stuff the whole time.
Yeah.
And I want to say this because I think it's like, it's so common for people to think this way, that deconstruction of your faith is a bad thing. And if you want to hear a great soundbite on this, you got to listen to an interview John Mark McMillan did. I remember in this interview, he said, deconstruction is like a natural part of how we live our lives. Like it should just be what you do. And he said, could you imagine? So he was like, when I was 13 years old, I had an idea of what women were.
I love that.
Could you imagine if I never deconstructed my idea of women as I lived my entire life? And he was 38 at the time. And he was like, could you imagine if I was a 38-year-old running around with a 13-year-old conception of women? Do you know what I would be like? In fact, you might know people like that, and they make you sick. And that's the truth, is like, if you're not deconstructing and reconstructing your faith constantly,
what are you doing?
you're kind of like,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know, you're not growing.
Yeah.
Interestingly, C.S. Lewis says this, which is one of the best quotes of all time. He says, my idea of God is not a perfect one. And I love that, because the idea is like, of course, we can't conceptualize perfect ideas of who God is. It has to be revealed. He says, my idea of God is not a perfect one, but then he says this, it has to be shattered from time to time, but he does the shattering himself. And I think the reality is, if we are actually open to exploring who God is with God, he can shatter the image that we've created of himself time and time and time again. That is what my prayer is as we go through the process of just kind of like revealing the themes in this book.
Ugh, I love that.
Yeah. So I would say, like, if you're, if you're on this live stream, I'm basically going to be speaking to two different groups of people. So the first one is anybody who is inside the faith, maybe like Laura was, and is kind of curious, like, what do I actually believe exactly? I was born as a Christian. I know that, like, I do the ritualistic things. I come on a Sunday, I pray with people, like, I do those things. But at the end of the day, when I get asked hard questions, when I go into classroom settings, when I'm out to eat at a restaurant with friends and they ask me, you know, why do you believe in a talking snake? I want to know why I believe those kinds of things. And this book is for you. And then for people who are in another category, if there's anybody on the live stream who's curious about faith, you may be a total atheist, or you may just be like, yeah, you know, like, I've been around Christianity and I'm very curious, but I can't really get there intellectually. It doesn't make sense. We would love to walk through the themes in this book and be able to explore that with you. I think that you'll find the way that C.S. Lewis presents the argument, the case for Christianity is so compelling. You can definitely walk away from it when it's done, but you definitely can't say it's unintelligent. So with that said, I thought, and guys, can you throw up my slides? Because I've lost my ability to throw them up. There's a 4-point slide that I would love to throw up right now.
And just so everyone knows, watching this, and as Mike is talking and kind of walking through things, you can leave a question in the comment section to the right of the video, because we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So if Mike says anything that kind of triggers a question in you, just feel free to put that there and we'll get it.
Cool. So how do you read Mere Christianity? Here's the most important thing. You need to realize that this book is broken up into what were 4 broadcast talks and then consolidated into a book. And so as you go through and read it, make sure that you read it in 4 parts. For example, if you have the paper copy, or even if you're on Kindle, when you open up to the first page, it's going to say Book 1. And Book 1 is basically just Section 1. That's all that means. And so make sure that you keep that in mind as we go. And the 4 sections are going to answer 4 specific questions. So those 4 questions are basically this. The first one is there meaning in the world? So this will be like, I think it's chapters 1 through 4. And this is what we're going to ask you to read after this week. So 1 through 4 basically explores this idea. Is there meaning in the world? That's a huge question that we ask today. And the fundamental bedrock idea behind it is, now that we have science, is religion really valid? Like, hasn't science proved that everything is basically just socially constructed, and we're all dancing to our DNA, and we're deterministic, and we're just going, you know? We're just another animal, and we do what we do. And so C.S. Lewis has to approach that question first. Is there meaning in the world? Why? Because you can't really get to the idea of, are all religions true? Or you can't get to the idea of, okay, if I am a Christian, how should I act? Or what's the point of all of this in the first place if you don't even believe that there's meaning in the world? And so the very first thing that C.S. Lewis attempts is to basically prove to someone that there's meaning in the world. And the way that he does that, as you read, you'll discover the way that he does that is through the framing of morality, which I actually think is like the only way. I've been in a bunch of conversations with people where they try and talk about the origin of the world and why it's like, it's so crazy that the world even exists and that we would, and that's how we know there's a God. And I'm like, I don't really know. I think that there's all kinds of reasons that we could be here, and I think that there's a lot of stuff that's valid. But one thing that has confused me my whole life is that I believe somewhere deep down inside of me that I ought to act and behave a certain way, and that I actually know that I'm not.
Yeah.
And that is a crazy thing. And what C.S. Lewis talks about is that's actually a universal experience. Now, it's not popular in our culture today. Everybody believes in, moral relativism, and it's just truth is subjective. But you'll basically read a very compelling case that morality is very objective, and that while we may differ in our degrees of what we believe is right or wrong,
he talks about,
exactly. In culture, we're gonna differ on degrees of what we may believe, but that standard seems pretty irrefutable across culturally. So that's one of the first things that he explores. There's an interesting quote that I highlighted. If you find this while you're reading, that I think is really fun. If you have the book, it's on page 22. Here's what he says about science in the debate of science versus religion. He says, science works by experiments. It watches how things behave. Every scientific statement in the long run, however complicated it looks, it means something like this. I pointed the telescope to such and such a part of the sky at 2:20 a.m. on January 15th and saw so-and-so. Or, I put some stuff in this pot and heated it to such and such a temperature, and it did so-and-so. Do not think that I'm saying anything against science. I'm only saying what its job is. And the more scientific a man is, the more he would agree with me that this is the job of science. And a very useful and necessary job it is too. But why anything comes to be there at all, and whether there's anything behind the things that science observes, that is something of a different kind. If there is something behind, then either it will have to remain altogether unknown to men, or else make itself known in some different way. The statement that there is any such thing and the statement that there is no such thing are neither of them statements that science can make. And real scientists do not usually make them. It's usually the journalist and popular novelist who have picked up a few odds and ends of half-baked science from textbooks who go into it. After all, it's really a matter of common sense. Supposing science ever became complete so that it knew every single thing in the whole universe, is it not plain that the questions, why is there a universe, and why does it go on as it does, and why does it have any meaning, those questions will remain just as they are. And so when we talk about, in that first chapter, when he goes into that idea of science, and can we get all of our value out of science, and can we ascribe meaning from science, that's one of the main things that he's going to be getting into. So that's the first part. Taylor, can you throw the slide up again? Second, when you get through the first 3 or 4 chapters, and then you're going to get to the, what's called Book 2, and that is going to address this question. Okay, we will have agreed that there is meaning in the world, and so the question becomes, where does that meaning come from? And that question is basically a religious question, and so we get into the discussion of, are all religions actually true? And in that, you're probably familiar with the fact that there are 5 world religions that are extremely common. So that's Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And so we're actually going to explore each of those in a really short, brief way.
Small task.
Here's Hinduism in 30 seconds. We're gonna try and explore those religions, and then basically ask the question: okay, what are these? Where do these overlap, and where are they different? Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about this is it gets into the topic of exclusion, and that's a really interesting topic today because nobody likes the idea of exclusive truth.
Right.
And so a really popular conversation is that all religions are fundamentally the same. They're just superficially different. And so we'll probably, C.S. Lewis is going to make the argument that all religions are fundamentally different. They're just superficially the same. And we're going to explore like each of those religions individually to break that down. Probably the most interesting thing from this is in those claims of exclusivity, what we really find is that truth just tends to be exclusive. And there's almost no way around that. And so, you know, you can't really bump into somebody who is Islamic and they just say, oh yeah, everything you believe as a Christian is absolutely true.
Yeah.
That's not the way it works. That's not why they are a Muslim. And so we, as Christians, believe the same. There are just tenets of the faith that make it radically different from other religions. And so we're going to go into that idea of religions and explore what makes these different and where is the overlap and is there truth in it. So one of the things, when you open up to book 2, the interesting thing that you'll find is that C.S. Lewis has a lot of grace in the way that he goes about this. This is his opening quote in book 2. I have been asked to tell you what Christians believe, and I'm going to begin by telling you one thing that Christians do not believe. If you are a Christian, you do not have to believe that all other religions are simply wrong all through. If you are an atheist, you do have to believe that the main point in all religions of the whole world is simply a huge mistake. If you are a Christian, you are free to think that all of those religions, even the strangest ones, contain at least some hint of truth. When I was an atheist, I had to try to persuade myself that most of the human race had always been wrong about a question that mattered to them most. When I became a Christian, I was able to take a more liberal view. But of course, being a Christian does mean thinking that where Christianity differs from other religions, Christianity is right and they are wrong. As in arithmetic, there's only one right answer to a sum, and all the other answers are wrong. But some of these wrong answers are much nearer to being right than other answers. So I think we are going to look at those and, like, you know, a lot of people throw the baby out with the bathwater and just basically say, like, yeah, these religions are totally false. And the kernel of truth that's in the middle of it is, yeah, I think there's actually something super valid in all of these. And that's why people make that kind of claim.
Yeah.
So it's not like an absolute rejection of the idea that there's no truth in any other religion, but just the claims that Christianity make being maybe more true than those religions. That's what you'll run into in book number 2. In book number 3, this is where we've covered the question, is there meaning in the world? Number 2, are all religions true? We're going to make the assertion that Christianity is the truest. Number 3, if Christianity is true, here's a big question. How do I live? And this, I think this is a great one to get into because a lot of this, up to that point, you'll basically be in a huge intellectual headspace.
Yeah.
So it's going to be all proofs and illustrations and all of that. And it's like, oh, this is actually what it's for.
Yeah.
You know?
Some practical stuff.
Like at the bottom of it, we're basically going to be looking at, okay, like now if I believe these things, now how do I actually live? And so CS will basically make the assertion that faith, hope, and love are the 3 central tenets of what it is in the life of a believer. Number 4, Taylor, throw it up one more time. What's the point? Okay, so if we went through all of those things, it's like, is there meaning in the world? Are all religions true? If Christianity is true, how do I live? And number 4, why should I do this anyway? Why does any of this actually matter? And in that last book, C.S. Lewis, so section, I'm going to stop calling them books just so we don't get confused. In that last section, C.S. Lewis basically goes into what the point of all of this actually is. And I love what he, I love the way that he describes this. I think that most of you probably know that C.S. Lewis wrote Chronicles of Narnia. So there's a scene in Chronicles of Narnia when some of the kids is she like the queen or something like that?
Yeah, the White Witch.
The White Witch. They get back to the White Witch's castle, and she has, over a period of time, she's basically turned everyone to stone.
Yeah.
And when Aslan comes into the castle, he starts breathing on them, and all of them start coming back to life, changing back.
So good.
And a lot of what C.S. Lewis believed conceptually made its way into a lot of the writing that he had. And so one of the things that you'll see is, like, that's a picture of what C.S. believed that our lives were actually supposed to be. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? And he compared that to statues. And so here's what he says. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? A statue has the shape of a man, but it's not alive. In the same way, man has, in a sense I'm going to explain, the shape or likeness of God, but he has not got the kind of life that God has. And this is precisely what Christianity is about. The world is a great sculptor's shop. We are the statues, and there is a rumor going around the shop that one day some of us are going to come to life. As he walks you through what all of this is for, we see the main point is not to be intellectually intelligent about all this, not to be able to be in those types of conversations and defend your faith reasonably, but to actually know that, like, at the very bottom of this, the promise is that you've actually been living half a life, and that you're made in the image of God, but until he breathes on you, you'll never be who you actually were supposed to be. Kierkegaard has this quote that I've always loved. He says, now, upon his conversion, now, with God's help, I become myself. And I've always basically just, like, lived by that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that we'll ever be who we're actually supposed to be without God injected into us. You know?
Yeah.
So anyway, that is, that's the 4 parts. Taylor, throw it up one more time. That's the 4-part general overview of this book. The reason why I put something like that up with those 4 sections is because C.S. Lewis is not the easiest to read. And so if you don't really understand or have a roadmap of where you're going, it's going to be, like, a little bit difficult.
And also, it is the kind of thing, like, for me, book 3 and 4 are a little bit hard for me to, like, comprehend and swallow. But honestly, like, if I can just speak right to everyone live streaming, it's to encourage you guys to read this book, sit with it, like, wrestle with it, because I've heard you teach this 2 or 3 times now, and the way that Mike breaks this down, I'm just going to brag on you for a second, is so helpful and clear, and if you're going to read this book, this platform is a wonderful, wonderful way to do it, so I encourage you to stick with it, even though it can get wordy.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to basically talk about how the class is going to flow. This actually is a class. So we do, the Calvary campus is classroom format, and so every week there's sessions and there's homework. So the way this is going to work is every week we're going to basically get into one of those topics, which is really nice because it makes it super easy for you who are reading. All you have to do is read that section of the book. And so your homework for this next week is to read through that section. Now, I do have some extra credit. Taylor, can you throw up the homework slide? So here's the extra credit. In chapter 2, there are, I'm going to stand up and read. There are 3 common objections to Lewis's idea of natural law. And I want to see if you can find those. If you can, also, this is like super extra credit, see if you can figure out what C.S. Lewis's illustrations are for why those objections are not really objections at all. So that's your homework. But all you have to do is make sure that you read through section 1. Section 1 is basically, you're gonna dive into his whole case for morality as a proof that meaning exists. And as you go through, hopefully some of the brief explanation we've given you helps with that. Here's another thing that we're going to do. Every time that we do this, we're going to do a Q&A at the end. Q&A is one of the most fun parts of being able to do this live, and so we were kind of sad knowing that we were going to have to live stream this. I was like, man, the Q&A is like where all the dirt comes out, and that becomes like super fun. And so what we've decided to do is we're going to save Q&A for the back portion of this, like the last like 20 minutes. So sessions will be probably an hour, and 20 minutes of that will be Q&A. So here's what we want you to do. On the live stream, in the comments, we want you to leave a question in the comments at any time that you want to. We have a person here who's going to be on the live stream looking for any questions, and they'll write them down. And then after we do about our 40 or 50 minutes of teaching, then we'll go through some of those questions. We'll pick about 4 or 5 of the best ones, and then we'll walk through those. So that's what we're going to do, and we're actually going to transition into that now. The last thing I'll say is this. Probably 2 or 3 things. I want to, first of all, just say thank you for doing this, because I think today there are just so many things that can grab your attention. And so the idea that you guys want to sit down and read a book that was written in the 1940s and explore some of these like deep, rich things in life is really, really cool. So I just honor your commitment in doing that, and I do want to encourage you that what you're sowing into, the time that you've put into reading this book, the time that you're putting into this class, it will pay dividends. I have been in times in my life where I literally just could never walk away from the things that C.S. Lewis said. And those things grounded me probably more than a lot of things in life. So honor you for your commitment and encourage you that if you're looking for answers, I believe that you will get them out of this class. And the last thing I want to say is this. Please give us grace, because you don't know it, but we're sitting on a stage in an auditorium of 1,000 empty seats. And you look like a camera right now, to be honest. And it's just weird to do live stream. And we're going to try and create a classroom environment in this environment. And so give us grace as we I feel like super stuffy, and like me and Laura had all these plans, like we were going to joke and talk.
We were going to do Would You Rather. We were like really going to have fun.
And like we are, it's just like, it's a tight environment. So we want to make this as much of a classroom environment as possible. So please throw your comments in, ask your questions, and we would love to make this like very collaborative and very classroom. Before we go to Q&A, we might as well just do our Would You Rather so people get to know us a little bit better.
Yeah, they're sitting on the edges of their
All right,
seats
so what's
now.
yours for me? If you guys don't know how the game works, it's like this. Would you rather this or that happen, and you've got to pick one. But usually there are 2 absolutely terrible things that you would never want to happen, and you just have to pick between 2 horrible options. So Laura has a Would You Rather for me, and I have a Would You Rather for her.
I do, and I'm really self-conscious because Mike always thinks of the best Would You Rathers, and he's going to think mine's stupid.
Mine's so good.
Okay, so mine's a little gross. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Would you rather, Mike, like your entire body, like from your hairline to your toes, be like as thick covered in hair as the top of your head right now? No haircut, Corona haircut.
Okay.
Or would you rather all of your skin be like severely peeling sunburnt all the time?
I would pick the peeling skin, because
it's so easy for him to answer.
Yeah, no, I just commit to an answer, and then I figure out why. But in my gut, I commit to peeling skin, and I think it's because I actually do like peeling the skin off.
Yeah, it's like
it's just, I don't know, there's something satisfying about that, and I just can't deal with hair.
Yeah.
I mean, even growing a beard further than this, I can't do. PSA, public service announcement. I haven't had a haircut in 2 months.
And he's really self-conscious
about it. And I am really self-conscious about it. So if somebody would like come over my house in like a beekeeper suit and like some barber and cut my hair, I would really, really appreciate that. So make sure you hit me up. I'll give you my phone number if you drop yourself in the comment.
Oh my God.
All right, here's my Would You Rather for you.
Okay.
It's a first date. It's been amazing. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, guy of my dreams.
Yeah.
I know, I already know he's the one, and it's been one date. All right, he's dropping you off, and you can just tell a kiss is coming. And you have these 2 options.
Okay.
Time stops, he's stuck in time, you're outside of time, and you have the next 20 seconds to either do one of these 2 options.
Okay.
1, you have to eat the spiciest chicken wing from Buffalo Wild Wings. You just have to eat it, and then when you get back into time, you're right there, but just like with wing sauce
like
all over your
covered.
face. All right, that's 1.
Okay.
Or you have to eat a grasshopper, but you get to wash it down with water before the 30 seconds is out.
The spicy chicken, for sure. Because 1, I love spicy food, and I really think it would be a funny story.
Yeah.
Because if I know myself, like I'm gonna make a fool
That's true.
of
It
myself.
would be funny, but the
It'd be
grasshopper
so
would be
funny.
gross.
The grasshopper would be gross. The funny, our lips would
He'd
be
be like,
burning.
babe, something's in your teeth. Is that a grasshopper leg?
And I'd be like, what? No, the sauce, it would be so funny.
Cool, I'm into
I might
that.
do that on my next date.
Guys, we're going to go into the Q&A segment. So obviously, we didn't cover specific stuff here. So I would like you to just ask any questions. They could be really general, but they could be about some of the topics that we did broadly go over. And we can get into that. We promised you guys 20 minutes. This will last till 8 o'clock. So we're going to come back in 2 minutes, answer any questions you have. Could even be about the format of the class. So we'll give you 2 minutes, and then we'll be back. Thanks. And just like that, we're back. So you guys actually sent in a ton of questions.
Thank you.
And we're going to try and go over and get to as many of them as we can in the next like 12 or so minutes. But we'll start with whatever you throw at me, Laura.
All right, let's go. Mike, what advice would you have for someone who struggles with the philosophy of the book and has been burned out on it before?
So I think that means, I don't know what the philosophy of the book means, but let me just try and like move in that direction.
Yeah.
And then I'll talk about being burned out.
Yeah.
So the philosophy of the book is that it's basically trying to describe mere Christianity and like what is the most fundamental foundational elements of Christianity. What do Christians believe? Not what do Protestants and Catholics believe, not what do people who are in different denominations believe, but if you ascribe to Christianity, what do you believe? If you struggle with that philosophy, I don't know, because I think that's a great way of going about the process of writing a book about Christianity. So I'm not totally sure what exactly that word philosophy means. I do know that a ton of people, and this is like the most common experience that everybody has, everybody always says, C.S. Lewis, I love his books. Oh, what have you read? Mere Christianity. Did you like it? Yeah. What did you like about it? I don't remember. That's basically what everybody says.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I get it, because he's such a good writer that when you're going through, you're like, I love this, I love this, I love this. But I think two things kind of hinder it a little bit. One, he's a very, very smart person.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, this is a guy who's like one of the most respected people to have ever gone to Oxford, which is one of the most respected colleges in the world. And then the other thing is that he was writing for an audience that was primarily like 1930s to the 1960s.
Right.
So that's not us, and a lot of the things have changed. So like finding the context for some of those things, even the writing style in general. He has like a fun, playful style that was like kind of really old. And if you're used to reading like Huffington Post or like the way, like the way we get our news and stuff, and like nobody even reads essays anymore.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to reread sentences and paragraphs, and that's okay.
So here's what I promise. I promise to, in this class, we're going to take those ideas and some of the language that he uses, and we're going to break that down in a much more simplistic way.
Yeah.
So we'll unpack his illustrations, and we'll really just get into like, you can read through the whole thing, and as long as you have some context for it, when we're in class next week, you're going to be like, oh.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say to that person.
Yeah, and that should be encouraging to them. This is a cool question. I don't know if you know the answer, but why do you think Lewis was chosen for the broadcast to the English people?
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that he was a little bit of an academic.
Yeah, he was a voice.
He was an academic voice already. He wrote Chronicles of Narnia, so he was a little bit iconic. So children knew him super well.
That's cool.
So one of the things is, this is the guy who wrote Chronicles of Narnia, and now he's going to be on the radio. And the other thing is, a lot of people don't know this, but during World War II, when it kicked off, C.S. Lewis was asked to speak as a chaplain at a bunch of army, like military events, RAF events. And he was talking to people who basically were like, yeah, next time I go up in the air, I don't know if I'm coming back. So I mean, those guys were like, we want somebody who knows about Christianity to talk to us about what the faith actually means. And that eventually, I think by giving those talks to the soldiers, the BBC caught wind of it and was like, we'd love to just broadcast this to the whole city.
Yeah, and I read that yesterday, actually, when I was looking some stuff up about this book. And, he was known for those talks, but I read that initially the BBC was like, can you talk about literature on the radio?
Right.
Because that'll just like make the people happy, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, no, this is what they actually need. Like, they don't need to just hear about literature and stuff.
That's funny, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Okay, next question. Lewis believed that God, hold on. Okay, Lewis believed that the pleasures of this world were never meant to satisfy us, but rather they were meant to arouse our desire for God. He called them echoes of the real thing. That wasn't a question, that was just like a cool idea, and I really appreciated it, but it made me sound really awkward when I was trying to make it a question.
That's one of the best C.S. Lewis quotes ever.
I love that quote. Someone asked, how big is the grasshopper in your Would You Rather?
In my Would You Rather, it's a really small grasshopper,
no,
and it's
in
been
my
dead.
head, it
and
was
it's in one of those like REI,
juicy.
like it's in one of those REI packs where you can like take it to the moon and eat it.
No.
Like, it's nutritious. It'd be done in a second.
It's disgusting. Okay. Any tips to get into the book? I've started it before, but I couldn't make it past the first chapter. That's kind of going back to like the writing style and that stuff.
If you can't make it past the first chapter, I would say this: read the first chapter and then put it down and come to class next Wednesday. Because if you're not really getting anything out of it, the cool thing is this: this is like a survey course. So the trick is you don't really have to read the book. It'll be so much better if you do. But if you don't, you can still walk away really, really grasping mere Christianity, because we're going to unpack each of those sections of the book every week. So don't read the book if it's really that much of a pain. We'll go over it, and by the time it's done, you'll be able to teach somebody else who has read the book.
Yeah, and you'll probably want to read it.
Yeah. Oh, that's another thing, too. A lot of people that have taken the class say, you know what, now that you've taught this section of the book, now I want to go back and read it.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that you can do.
That's cool. My dad asked, hey, Dad, I don't know if you know this
Shout out
either.
John Briggs.
What up, John? Do you know Lewis's conversion story?
I do. So C.S. Lewis has a book called Surprised by Joy, and he has one of the best quotes for somebody who converted. So he was raised in a pretty much just like an atheistic household, and then he went to university, and then he went into the military. And throughout this whole time, it was like faith was just irrelevant. And his general view was like, I don't know why anybody believes that stuff to begin with, nor do I care. And then he met a bunch of people. One of those people that he met was J.R.R. Tolkien. Oh, so Tolkien took him for a walk one day, and I think that he said, he doesn't know exactly how it happened, but when they started the walk, Christianity wasn't true, and by the time it ended, it was. And one of the things that Tolkien talked about is he said, C.S., you're moved so much by literature. Do you ever wonder why you're moved so much by this type of story? The story of like Frodo and the ring or something like that. Why is it that when one person gives their life for the sake of many, you always seem moved to tears in literature? And that just crystallized it, and he said, I can't believe it. There's something in me that like not only like yearns for this to be true, but actually believes it. And he said he went home that night, he read some of the Bible, and then he says in Surprised by Joy, he said, I closed the book, I got down on my knees, and I prayed the sinner's prayer, the most reluctant convert in all of England. And I was just like, wow, what an honest and cool conversion, because it's like, how many people do you know who like actually gave that kind of legitimate exploration to their faith, came to the end of it and was like, you know what? I don't even want this to be true, but I'm so compelled by the truth of it, I surrender my life to you.
Oh, that's so cool. I love their friendship. Okay, next question, and I think it's my last question for now. If one of the ways in which God woos unbelievers to him, hold on. Oh man, guys, I'm getting a little bit confused by these questions. Okay, so remember a little bit ago when I started reading a quote and I thought it was a question?
Yeah.
This is the continuation to that. So I'm going to start over.
Nice.
I'm really sorry,
Brian.
Like
a really cool.
Brian
was like writing it, and he was like, actually, you guys take 2 minutes, and I'll come back and write the rest of my question.
I know, Brian should probably just teach this class. Okay, so we're starting at the top. Lewis believed that... okay. I think he did. Okay, it's okay. Everything's fine. Okay, Lewis believed that the pleasures of this world were never meant to satisfy us, but rather that they were meant to arouse our desire for heaven, right? So echoes of the real thing. Or something along those lines. If this is one way in which God woos unbelievers to him, what do you think are some of the other ways that God draws people to himself?
Read the first part, the super confusing first part.
Yeah. Lewis believes that the pleasures of this world were never meant to satisfy us, but rather they're meant to arouse our desire.
So pleasures of this world can be a way of actually pointing us to God.
Yeah,
what are the other ways?
How else does God draw us
Well, I'll
to
tell you
himself?
what, one really easy other way is coronavirus. That seems to be pointing a lot of people towards God right now.
That's true.
But yeah, I guess like the overarching theme of that is the idea of, okay, pleasure seems to do that, but pain does that as well. And C.S. Lewis says, you know, like I'm going to butcher this quote, but he says somewhere, he says, God whispers to us in our pleasure, he speaks to us in our mundane or whatever, but he screams at us in our pain. Yeah. And he says pain is God's megaphone for rousing a deaf world. And I think like as much as we probably do you know, as much as pleasure can point us to God, pain seems to do that even more.
Totally.
I know that like it's at least proven true in my life. I know your life enough to know that it's proven true. And so I think there's definitely some substance there, and that those things point, that suffering is when we start asking really, really serious questions, because we practice the art of elimination. What is necessary?
Yeah.
What is necessary now? And some of that is what's going on right now. Like a lot of people are in their homes and they're basically saying, wow, family is a lot more important than I thought, because if I didn't have a family, I'd be completely alone in this whole thing, you know?
Yeah.
And you're just realizing like, wow, I should really invest more in my family, because that's like an amazing thing. Or like you're realizing that like, you know, me and my sister were talking about when we run around New York. I mean, New York's a place where you can just spend money like crazy, you know? And you're like, oh, $6 coffee, $20 sandwich. Like, you just keep going. You're like, where did all my money go? And you get back to like this ultra simplicity of me making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every day. And you're like, yeah, what really matters? And like, what is money for?
Right.
And I think at the bottom of all that stuff is just a lot of truth that God's embedded in the world. So like, I look at that and I'm like, yeah, pleasure is definitely, I've been that kind of person where I can look at a sunrise and be like, wow, God is definitely behind this. And then I've been in those situations of pain. I also think that like, and this is my own personal thing, I think that God points to himself in our curiosity. Because I was definitely born like ever curious. Yeah. And I always wanted to discover everything. And like whenever, even I'm like that guy who like when people are talking at the end of the table about something that like I don't know, I'm like,
you're trying to listen.
Yo, need a new friend?
Yeah.
I'm here. And I just have like this insatiable curiosity about life and what's true and how to live it well and all that stuff. And I think that God exists in that, you know? Like I have this little like weird, I have this weird belief that Abraham was like super bored in Ur, and that's how the Bible started, you know? It's like, it wasn't that God just spoke because he wanted to do something. He was like, Abraham, I know that you're curious about what really matters, so come to a land that I'll show you. And basically that's the call for all of us. Will you come to a land that I will show you? So I would say that like, you know, definitely pleasure, definitely pain, but also I think our curiosity is one of the coolest things that God gave us, and I think it's like one of the most important things for us to like flex. Yeah, I love that. Any more questions? Any more questions? Let me double check. No, not right now. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, yeah, so guys, it's 8:01, and yeah, just wanted to say thanks so much for joining us. You guys have just been incredible. No, the feedback we're getting. But like honestly, I know like however many of you guys are out there on the live stream, we're just like so thankful for you being a part of this, and we want to just make this room bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. So feel free, if this is valuable, feel free to tag your friends in posts, invite people, send them the link. We would love for you guys to join us next week as we go through book 1. Book 1 is going to, it's hands down the fan favorite because it explores really that huge topic of science and religion. And that's like obviously like one of the most debated topics in our culture today. So if you are going to make it for any of these, make our class number 1 where we go through that first question. For homework, make sure that you read through the first couple chapters. When you get to the end of section 1, you're done. And then if you want to do the extra credit, you can. But thank you so much for being on the live stream. Thanks, and we will see you next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Peace. Bye.